Well, a new kind of global citizen has emerged. They have several homes, they invest and do business internationally, and most importantly, they have multiple citizenship. Countries all over the world now compete for those global citizens, and not least, and in particular in the Mediterranean region. Meanwhile, the political attitude to multiple citizenship has changed as well. Countries now view this as a means of political influence or soft power. Residence and citizenship have become economic goods with which countries and investors increase their competitiveness. A clear evidence of this is actually the increased demand for residence and citizenship programs worldwide, or what is commonly referred to as investment migration or investment migration programs. Let's look at some history. In ancient Athens and Rome already, actually, citizenship investment was practiced quite widely. In particular, the Roman Empire was, I would say, the first that actually introduced a large-scale citizenship investment program, and pretty much everyone who contributed to society or otherwise to the Roman interests was granted citizenship of Rome. There's an interesting account, actually, going back to biblical times, of the arrest of St. Paul, the apostle. Actually, that's the one that shipwrecked in Malta. Yeah. And he was arrested by Roman guards and was asked, "Are you a Roman?" And he answered, "Yes." And the commander, the Roman commander, said, "Actually, I am also Roman, and I bought this citizenship for a lot of money." And then Paul replied, "Yes, but I am a citizen by birth." And when the Roman guards knew that St. Paul was actually a Roman citizen, they let go of him, and they were a little bit afraid. Already at that time, it was important what kind of citizenship you carry. In medieval times, the medieval towns, they very often integrated new arrivals as citizens if they contributed something or spent some money on the city's treasury. In Britain, very interestingly, actually, Great Britain had a widespread practice of accepting merchants, wealthy people from continental Europe, particularly from Germany, who contributed significantly to the building of the British Empire, all done by citizenship, by investment. And in France, in the French Revolution, everyone who somehow contributed to the interests of the French Revolution was granted citizenship of France. Now, with normal foreign direct investment, decisions are usually based on competitive rates of return. With citizenship investment, this is a little bit different, as investors price in the residence or passport asset, and therefore things are looked at a little bit differently. This is an interesting opportunity for countries. In Europe, of course, we have a very particular situation because any grant of citizenship in the European Union of an EU member state automatically also grants and confers EU citizenship. This has led, not least here in Malta, to rather interesting discussions. In fact, Malta is a very, very interesting case if you look at this from an EU constitutional law point of view, because it is the first time where the EU Commission actually encroached on a member state's right to determine who is the citizen. It's actually, if you look at the constitutional framework of Europe, citizenship is one of the most important and clear remits where it is completely up to the individual member states to decide on their immigration citizenship laws. And so this incursion of the EU Commission onto Malta is very, very interesting. But what is very clear also is that the legal situation in that regard is absolutely undisputed. And therefore, EU member states, of course, continue to have the absolute sovereignty over citizenship. And that poses a very interesting opportunity for countries to benefit from well-run investment migration programs. In about 2 years since the launch of Malta's new citizenship program, the country attracted some 800 applications on the pipeline. In fact, I understand meanwhile it's probably more than 1,200. But it is in that range. But what is more important than this actually relatively small number, I come to that in a moment, is that this represents foreign direct investment to the tune of over 1 billion euros. Now, for an 8.5 billion euro economy like Malta's, this is a significant amount of capital. From a practical impact point of view, it is quite important to know the number of naturalizations actually happening in Europe every year. The last figures we have is from 2010, but it's quite representative, I think, of the yearly numbers of citizenship grants in the EU. And this is a staggering 810,000. Yes, 810,000 citizenships are granted every year. So if you compare this to citizenship by investment programs, and in Europe there's a couple of countries, so if you take them all together, if you take Malta, Cyprus, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, those countries that have such provisions, direct such provisions, not counting the residence programs, you maybe, if you round it up, you come to say 600 a year. Okay, so there's maybe 600 that are granted a year on those bases. This is less than 0.01% of all citizenships granted in Europe. Yet these really few numbers, what is also very interesting to note, actually represent ideal citizens. In the EU, there is a directive that basically provides under what circumstances as an EU citizen you can actually avail yourself of certain freedoms, such as the freedom of movement. So there are certain stipulations. And interestingly, all those, let's say, 600 citizenships that are granted under the citizenship by investment provisions, these people, they absolutely ideally meet those very same criteria that the EU sets for its own citizens to avail themselves of the freedoms that EU citizenship actually provides. So in a way, these are all ideal people that come here. So the number of citizens admitted under such programs is clearly rather negligible, regardless of the political view you take on that. Now, if you adopt a non-political view of modern citizenship, the arguments in favor of citizenship by investment are numerous, in my view, very powerful. The largest benefits for a country running such a program is if there are direct contributions to the state or to a national fund, such as, for example, in Malta. This is clearly the most straightforward and the most impactful of such ways of handling such a program, as the IMF also stated in a recent report. Other possibilities include, and that's also a component of the Malta program, to incentivize the private sector, particularly in the area of real estate. Now, all of this is part of a global trend, actually the transformation of citizenship. This includes that countries increasingly compete for those global citizens, bringing capital and talent, and in return offer residence and citizenship rights. Now, the future of access to residence and citizenship and the allocation of those rights, and in particular the concept of citizenship itself, will be very different indeed. Thank you very much.